You're watching the PoliticIt Podcast.
Good evening. Welcome to PoliticIt Podcast. I'm Senator John Johnson, and today we have Doug Durbano and Kera Birkeland, and we're all familiar with you, and we talked quite a bit. But you brought up an interesting issue to me that I think is worth exploring. We've heard a lot in the press about Lawfare, and this is a case where it's a federal agency, really, that is executing this against you. And why don't you explain for our audience kind of what's going on and where you're at in that process right now?
Happy to do so again. As always, thank you, John, for having us, Senator Johnson. We appreciate you very much. And thank you, Kera, for getting us lined up here. What we're dealing with here is an out-of-control federal bureaucracy who absolutely believes that they can do anything they want in the name of bank secrecy and protecting the deposit. We all believe that our deposits should be insured and protected. But recently, a federal court has announced that the FDIC is a secret society of extortionists and a modern-day Cosa Nostra. Everybody knows what a Cosa Nostra is?
So where is that from?
It's right out of U.S. District Judge Lynn Hughes, and that was a written opinion that he issued and then awarded some significant punitive damages to a fellow by the name of Hurwitz, who had been abused due to lawfare and weaponization of this bureaucracy that responded every time the vice president or the president, this is not the current administration,
right,
years ago. And so they would do whatever the administration wanted.
So let's talk a little bit about your case now. What specifically? I know you've been fighting this for a long time.
Yes, we have. So here's the best way that I could introduce it, if it'd be okay. To put it in context for our friends at home, so to speak.
Right.
You're driving down the road, you get pulled over. Police officer, reckless driving, out of the car. That's all you know. The police officer seizes your vehicle. It's towed on the spot, including all of your possessions in the car, takes your wallet and any possessions you have on your person, leaving you essentially with the clothes on your back, but takes your money. Then sequesters that, puts you in the back of the car, you're arrested, and then found guilty by the police department itself. They retain your car, your wallet, your money and possessions, and send you on your way.
Permanently retain. If I may jump in, Doug.
Yeah.
Number one, they permanently retain it. They permanently take away your license. You're never able to drive again. But I think what we need to touch on the fact is it wasn't even a police officer who making this determination. Police officer didn't see you driving down the road recklessly. An individual, an unelected bureaucrat, reached out to a police officer and said, I don't want this man on the road driving. He's reckless. Go get him. There's no evidence, there's no proof, there's no accountability. That is what is essentially happening with Doug's case, and what essentially could happen in any case around America if a federal bureaucracy comes in and decides they don't want you to have your rights.
I've got to bring it back to the Constitution,
right,
John.
Yeah.
I know you like the Constitution. I
right.
do too. We would say initially, well, that can't happen in America because we know in the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, we have the right to something called due process. And in the very first amendment, Bill of Rights, we have the guaranteed right to petition the government for redress of grievances. Right there with press, religion, guns, all of the rights. And that is preserved by, over to the Fourth Amendment, due process in the rights of the people. By the way, the government doesn't have due process rights. I always like to point that out. Just the people. So, you would think we'd go to court and have a decision for this poor fellow who just got pulled over, right?
Right.
Not in this case.
So let's explain your case now.
Okay, now about...
Okay. So let's go into the details about your case. What exactly happened?
So the government shows up on a Friday night at 5 o'clock. They have with them armed guards and individuals, and they essentially seize all of the assets of the bank. $300 some odd million worth of assets, and escort the current officers and employees off of the premises. So they seize all of the assets, deposits, loans, etc. There had never been a hearing. There had never been any due process, and we call this a pre-hearing process. And so
where exactly was this?
it was right in Layton, Utah.
In Layton, Utah.
That was the home branch.
And explain a little bit about this branch and what had gone on with this.
Well, the branch had, that was the original place where the bank started, and it had created a federally insured bank, obtained a patent pending on a unique banking or business concept which included a hybrid between a typical bank and a credit union. So this bank had a 35% advantage.
So it was a member-owned bank.
Member-owned bank. In fact, it had a trademark on that term as a member-owned bank, America's first member-owned bank. So it was having great success, raising new capital, doing fine, but the FDIC changed its mind.
What really interests me in this, I've known Doug, he's been a mentor for many, many years, is the fact that any small business owner, most citizens probably have received a letter from the government, whether state or federal, saying you didn't do something right. Something was wrong, right? And you have an opportunity to cure it, to fix it, to argue it, right? To say, oh wait, no, I put the wrong zero in the wrong place, whatever. In his case, he was never given that chance, not before, to say, wait a minute, let me prove otherwise, and not after the seizure, to say, wait, no, you got it wrong. Similar to if you were, pulled over for a driving infraction and you have a dash camera and you want to show, I did not do what you're accusing me of and I have footage to prove it. You can never do that.
So this bank had been approved, right?
Yes.
And you had raised this capital.
Yes.
And so they basically show up one day and they seize all the assets.
Including all the capital.
And so how long ago was this?
Over 10 years.
Yes. So it's over 10 years, about 15 years ago.
So 15 years ago, they took over $200 million.
300.
$300 million in capital from your institution.
Yes.
And they've held it this whole time and you've never had a day in court.
Correct. But they haven't held it. They've actually given it to other banks now.
Redistributed wealth.
So they actually took this capital and put it into other banks.
Yes.
So does that capital belong to individuals? Did that get transferred?
Yes.
The rights to it? So,
yes.
So the people who deposited this money
yes.
Were able to obtain it through other banks, right?
Yes.
It just got liquidated from your bank.
So the deposits are safe, but the capital, and we've used that word kind of interchangeably, but the capital, which would have been through the raising of stock or contributions from shareholders, was taken and also redistributed or given to other banks.
So those shareholders, did they still have rights to that?
No. Completely taken. That's what we call a seizure under the Constitution, which demands due process, and I'm happy to talk about that for just a second because that's
right.
The stage we're at. And ultimately, if the seizure is not appropriate, then it requires just compensation by the government. Exactly. If the government wants to change its mind, there's some support for that ability. The government can actually take property, such as a road or land for a road. We can respect that. But if they do, for the good of the people, the government must compensate those who they took the property from.
And this has happened this many years ago. And so what's the state of this right at the moment? I know you've got a case pending, right? But
yes.
But how come that took so long?
Well, I can tell you that fighting the government, particularly the FDIC or the U.S. government, is extremely hard. So is it true with the state of Utah? And I know you're the senator there, so I want to be sensitive.
Right.
But government adopts what's referred to as governmental immunity. It is very hard to overcome that. And that's really a misnomer, because the government doesn't have immunity, but they have a lot of hurdles that you have to overcome to get to justice. Anyway, it's been to the Utah Supreme Court once. And if I might just keep going in that vein.
Go ahead. Go ahead, yeah.
Good Justice Lee, who I argued with at the Utah Supreme Court, heard this case many years ago, and he confirmed that this case was worthy to go forward. In other words, you're past governmental immunity. Go ahead. And he made this statement, which I think is very powerful. Clearly, he said, the lack of an opportunity to be heard, either pre or post seizure, would have immense due process implications. With that, we were charged with go forward and prove that you did not get either substantive due process or procedural due process, or both. And I'm happy to chat about those two concepts.
Well, let's talk about that just a little bit, what that means.
So this case turns on whether or not there was due process. Start with that question. What is due process? It's a common sense term right out of the Constitution. It simply means, sometimes courts have said, it's the process that's due to be fair. But they've gone on further in cases like the Fuentes case from 20, 30 years ago, where the U.S. Supreme Court said, due process is basically this: a meaningful notice and opportunity to be heard. That's it. The quote. Notice, be heard. Put your case on.
The Fuentes case, if I may, was one where the government came in and took tables, chairs, an oven, a fridge, all without any notice and process given to them to deny, any of this being actionable by the government. And so in that case, and perhaps it was because it was so long ago, the United States government erred on the side of the citizen. But in Doug's case, number one, he had to fight to be heard, and he's still fighting to be heard, but it's our hope that they would err, but we have to get to that point where they will even hear it to err on Doug's side.
Our case, in all cases, you first are entitled to what's referred to as procedural due process. What is the procedure? This is the opportunity and the notice. That's the procedure. We, in our case, have never had even an opportunity to be heard. And that's where we're fighting for now. In another segment, perhaps we can share with you, when we are granted the opportunity to be heard, then we have substantive due process issues, which are challenges. We've brought in whistleblowers who have come forward and said, here's why the FDIC did what they did. It was for political reasons. It's for warfare, lawfare.
Right.
It was weaponization. So that's the substantive aspect. They acted in the legal term is arbitrary and capricious behavior without substance. But today, the entire appeal, and I've brought, Senator Johnson, our brief that we just filed 2 days ago with the United States Supreme Court, and this is a petition to receive our case. It's called a writ of certiorari. And they still use a book at the U.S. Supreme Court. I brought one for...
Yeah.
At this level, all we're asking for is, let us have a day in court. Please, instead of hear us.
So if the Supreme Court hears this case, okay, what happens?
If the Supreme Court hears it, then we get to brief the issue that the FDIC said that they own the constitutional claim of lack of due process. They own it. When they seized the assets of the bank, they also seized the asset known as the constitutional claim under Section 1983, whereby a citizen has the right, it's called a violation of our civil rights, to go to have our grievances addressed by the government. And so we bring a claim against the government and said, you violated my constitutional rights. You now have to give me that hearing. And then it's a two-part process. At the hearing, I'll demonstrate that you didn't have that right.
So what can the court decide at that point, the Supreme Court? What are you asking them to do?
To order the case to be heard, to have a hearing in front of a jury, to have our grievance heard by a citizen, a group of our peers, as required by the Constitution. It's just that simple. Everything ultimately comes back here to the Constitution.
And it's interesting that they essentially, and Doug, you can elaborate more on this, but essentially the FDIC, which frankly, it's the FDIC today, but it could be any federal bureaucracy, any government agency could take this same position that they own this issue. They take away, they own those constitutional rights essentially.
So
you can't bring a claim against them
so
because they've got that under their belt, not you.
So basically they're saying, we're going to take all this stuff and you can't fight us. Right? You have no right.
A one-sentence quote from the FDIC or government's brief. The government said in one sentence in their preliminary statement, the only question this court, that's the appellate court, the only question this court need to decide in order to resolve this appeal is whether all the claims, whether all the claims belong to the FDIC or not, comma, they do.
So the citizen has no claim. The government can do what it wants, but you have no claim when they do something and create an action against you. You don't have a claim. That's
all the claims
so we
belong
come
to the FDIC.
in, we seize all the assets of your bank.
Right.
And we, of course, we did it in the right way. And you don't get a day in court to argue your side.
They don't even argue that they did it the right way. They argue that they statutorily have the right to do it without any hearing. That the law, as currently drafted, supports their position, which is we can do it and we do not have to give you a hearing, either post or pre.
It all goes back to, just to simplify it, is that reckless driving. An individual, in Doug's case, it was one individual decided that they wanted to seize the bank. They make a phone call. One individual makes a phone call, says, Senator John Johnson is a reckless driver, go arrest him, take everything. That is how this happens. This is what, if the FDIC can do this, why can't somebody in public safety do this? Why can't someone, in the Bureau of Land Management? We want that land. We want it.
EPA.
Exactly. We see this happening, but the problem is the fight is so hard because they are using our tax dollars to fight against Doug, who has to use his own time and means to fight for himself. And when he fights for himself, he truly fights for all the people because due process is granted to every American at this time, and it's not happening in this case.
Wow. Well, we're going to take a break, and we'll come right back.
Tired of media bias? Frustrated by political noise? PoliticIt.com cuts through the clutter, giving you real facts, clear analysis, and unbiased insight on the issues that matter most. Stay informed, stay empowered. Whether it's elections, policy changes, or breaking news, we've got you covered. No spin, no agendas, just truth you can trust. Visit PoliticIt.com today because informed citizens shape the future. PoliticIt.com, where politics meets clarity.
Welcome back to PoliticIt. We're here with Kera Birkeland and Doug Durbano. So we've been talking about this due process claim. So what's next? Where do you go next?
Thank you for getting us back on track. So we filed this, what's called writ of certiorari, which is a petition for the Supreme Court to hear us. Okay, honestly, we don't have a lot of contacts in Washington. We need public support, John, and that's why we're going public. We need some of the congressional delegation. I can tell you it'd sure be nice if Senator Lee would weigh in on this. It was his brother that wrote a favorable opinion for us in the Utah Supreme Court. If we could create some interest in this through your podcast, maybe folks could share it with their representatives and others, that might result in what's called an amicus, or friend of the court brief, so that the court will accept our petition. Apparently they get a lot of these petitions and they can only hear so many of them, and I think they're pretty busy right now under the current administration.
Right.
So we just need to
Well, this whole concept of due process is in the press, right? I mean,
100%, it's in the press, and I think it's something that should matter to every American, right? Especially Utah, wherever you are, because I know everyone I know. We're always concerned that we're going to be accused of something we never did, right? And we think that if we're accused, we're going to get our opportunity to restore our reputation and prove our innocence. And in this case, Doug hasn't been able to do that. And if you have nothing in this world, it's your name and your reputation. And when someone can just destroy it without the process of clearing it, without showing any evidence, no, these claims aren't true. Again, any government agency, federal, state, doesn't matter. If they can do this to one Utah citizen, what's stopping them from doing it to any Utah citizen?
Any citizen of the United States of America.
right.
We need to set a precedent from the United States Supreme Court that unelected bureaucrats cannot come out of the box and take property. The bureaucracy must also comply with the guarantees of our Constitution. When it says the government, it's more than just elected officials. It's not the elected officials that we need to be afraid of. It is the unelected officials, this fourth branch of government, that's out of control. And there are hundreds of these agencies.
So we would ask your viewers to please reach out, both at the local level and federal level, and say, please, get involved, reach out to Doug, help him with his case, right? Help him get in front of the Supreme Court. We need people to help draw that awareness to get that support so that due process can have its day in court.
Blake Moore locally, Steve Curtis. But again, Senator Mike Lee is always in tune with these constitutional issues. And
So
we have been talking to him.
You have been talking to him.
Yeah.
You've reached out to his office.
His office, yeah.
This is an interesting case, isn't it? I mean, it almost seems, it's incredible, right? And so you say, well, it
almost seems unbelievable.
Yeah.
You take into consideration, Doug received contact from 2 FDIC whistleblowers who saw the process, saw what was happening, and they said this is wrong. And they work for the FDIC. They saw the inner workings of this going down, and they reached out. Now, it's funny because the FDIC says you're not allowed to depose them. You cannot talk to them. None of their information can be brought to court. And we brought today a paper from the FDIC for all of the information that we essentially grandmaed, right? And said we need this information.
you put in a grandma request. You knew the right question to ask.
Yes.
And it looks like they supplied back the whole document to you.
Yes, they did. They supplied the entire 5 pages, and I'll just skip right to the end because every page looks exactly the same. We don't even know who signed this, and we don't even know what the date is, but we do know they filed it with the court as evidence to support their position that they had every right to seize the bank. Now, since then, we've gotten past these kinds of documents that are redacted, and we have 2 whistleblowers, and that will be a fun. If you'll have us back sometime.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to find out people that can actually tell you what was on that document.
They will tell us. They have told us now under oath. We have a written statement from them. But when that all came out, you see, that's when the FDIC switched tactics and said, you really don't have standing. They did not want this to come to court.
Yeah. So we really need it to come to court because it's an issue that would impact all citizens in our nation.
Well,
let's daylight it.
Everyone deserves their day in court, don't they? And that's all you're asking.
That's
for.
all.
You're just asking a judge to hear this case, bring out all the evidence, and see whether they actually had the authority to do what they did.
Thank you, John. Excellent summation.
Yeah.
It's just a simple request. We would like our day in court. Maybe we don't have the evidence. Maybe we'll lose. But can we at least just have our day in court, please?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for coming in, and we'll see you guys next week.